Hello, everyone. I'm Jill Shahen with Empire Chartered Consultants. Today with me is Joe Shahen. We always start this off by saying how I met the person. And I met Joe in utero, and he has been with me ever since. Joe has been a member of Empire Chartered Consultants for, just give me the fingers, Joe, 3 years, 4 years, three
Yeah,
years.
3 years.
But Joe, tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
So I started in the charter school world in May of 2010 at the Charter Association with Jill and Andrea, and then Jess came on board in 2014?
Yep.
And first, when I started there, I was doing data work and then moved over to more policy stuff, and then eventually the communications world. And then I left there in November of 2016 and went to work for the Independent Power Producers of New York. I was the communications director there for about 5 years, and then I went to work for the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Um, if anybody watching this lives in New York and has seen everything happening in the news right now with all of the climate legislation, that's been like a huge hot button issue right now and like trying to push back the state's climate goals. Yeah, I was working on a lot of that stuff, both on the advocacy side of it and then also on the state side of it from 2016 through 2022. And then yeah, I joined Empire at the beginning of 2023 and I've been here ever since. So I guess collectively I'm coming up on 10 years now in the charter school world by the time we hit June.
So it's been an interesting ride. You came back. Uh, little Bruce was just born,
Liam was
and
just born.
Andrea, being the great technical writer she is, definitely needed help because we all know I am not the writer, and you came in to start. And as you jump back into the work, how much had actually changed from the time you left the charter school world and the time you came back to the charter school world?
Oh, nothing. Well, certainly not for the better, but
Right.
not a lot had really changed. Um, I think we had joked, I think it even says it in my bio on the Empire website. Um, However many success schools, I forget off the top of my head right now, that had been chartered that I had added to like our tracker sheet back in the mid 2010s still hadn't been opened by the time I came back in 2023. Um,
It is in your bio, by the way.
yeah. So, I left, worked in an entire other industry, multiple presidential administrations had happened, an entire global pandemic. Um, Still, multiple schools hadn't opened. Um, Yeah, it seemed like a lot wasn't really different. I guess things to sort of riff off what Jess had said, things definitely got quieter. There seemed to be a lack of a cohesive voice in the movement. I know that's something Andrea has just written about on the blog recently. Um, when we were at the association, we were doing phone to action campaigns, huge advocacy days, big legislative pushes, things like that. And now charter schools are just very quiet all around. Um, yeah. So I
Does
guess that's what,
silence benefit the movement?
uh, it's hard to say. I mean, not when you need to advocate for things.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of that going on.
But like
So
if you want equality, if you want funding, if you need parody, anything, how does being silent help anybody?
it doesn't, and we're seeing that now. So I want to go back to your very first experiences when you worked at the association. When you walked into the job, other than what you knew I did for a living, you weren't like you had worked at Thatcher Park, but this was your first experience in an office and learning about, right, a hot button issue, which was charter schools. So you're there for a number of years. Andrea and I have talked a lot about organizational culture and structure. When you think back to our time at the association, Nexon, whatever we're going to call it, when you think about when, like, you walked in the door, you're on a very short time span to learn our issue, digest it, be able to make decisions, write about it, participate in, like, the CRM would have never been launched really at all without you. And then the follow up, going into it, and then actually working in the job. What surprised you? You walk in the door, you only know it from my perspective. If you can go back along, what surprised you first about the charter school movement? And then over your time there, how did you feel about organizational culture and structure? Because they all tie in.
Um, One of the things that always stuck out to me at when I was at IPNY, something somebody said at one of our conferences one year about sort of the policy work and, like, I guess lobbying and advocacy work is that a lot of the stuff people like us do is called the boring good, that most people never actually will have any idea goes on. And I think that term applies a lot to the organizational work as well. And like you just mentioned CRM. At this point, I've kind of forgotten what the acronym stands for. It was like customer resource management or relationship management or something. So uh, basically, when I had started at the Charter Association, I was essentially just a Nepo hire in college because Rachel needed somebody to help uh, manage all the contact database,
Wait,
like
stop.
contacts there.
So technically you knew me and got a job, but you actually didn't work for me and you
This
actually
is
worked.
true.
So, like, let's also add that you worked and you
This is
had
the
to
first
learn
time that I've ever
quickly.
actually worked for you
Right.
years and years later. But yeah, so basically, I needed a job as the semester was winding down, and Rachel needed someone to help manage all the school contacts. And I knew nothing about charters going in. So that was basically my first big project was organizing all of the school contacts. And not only did we have, at the time it was 100 something schools, but that quickly ballooned to more than 200. And then by 2013, we had taken on Connecticut. And then you have all the unopened schools, things like that. So, then you've got schools with multiple locations. So you're building out this massive database with thousands of contacts because then you've got all the school personnel. And then you've got like our friends of list who are just people like who Bill, Kyle, whoever, like people who they've met through their lobbying work. So you're building out this massive infrastructure of contacts that first we had like a custom Microsoft database that we had, and then we had to move it to like an online web tool in another website, and then we had to move it over to like the Nation Builder platform. And these are things that to people who don't do this work, like their eyes would just totally glaze over. But then when something's going on and you need to launch a text campaign at like 4:30 when everybody's getting ready to pack up and leave during budget season because we need to start pumping out emails specific to Buffalo, specific to Rochester, specific to New York City, like that is when doing the boring good really becomes essential because it's like all that work I've just spent the last like 3 years doing that nobody in the office seemingly has given a shit about or paid
Which is,
attention
it's
to.
absolutely
It's
true.
right. Like now, all of a sudden, boom, we have a thorough list and we can just start pumping out emails to everybody and be like, get this out to all your families at these schools and tell them to start texting your legislators in these districts because like these are the legislators that match up to your school addresses, things like that. So for me, I think my first go around, it took me several years until I started doing the communications work before I really grasped like the gravity of the issues so much. And for me, it was more adapting to the office culture and like doing that sort of organizational structure work, which, going through and editing these videos and everything, when you tell the stories about just I don't know, the interplay between the two offices that we had at that time in the 2010s. Like stories like that always hit really close to home for me because it was like trying to do office management. That was something in every job that I had subsequent to the association. That type of work always really stuck out to me because I don't know, the actual policy work and everything that we do for the actual schools, like, yes, that was very important, but the day-to-day managing of the office, like, oh my God, just things like keeping track of receipts, stuff like
But
that.
do
Like
you
that stuff
remember?
was so essential to what we do.
Do you remember the staff meeting?
Like the all staff meeting in Connecticut?
Hmm.
Yes, of course.
Do you remember Andrea and I asking what the mission statement was?
Of course. And nobody knew except for
Comms.
almost all of the New York staff.
So when you look back on that, where did we make the mistake with the other? I can tell you what my initial thought was. It's because none of us in New York had any oversight over anyone in Connecticut, with the exception of comms, weirdly.
Yeah.
But yet you did, but not really. Something went wrong. What
And
was it?
um
Is it communication? Is it accountability? Is it all of that? Like,
yes, I mean accountability was a big part. And I think, you know, in terms of like this conversation we're having now, I don't know if the goal is to like tie everything back to schools and things like that, but now when I'm working on renewal applications and things like that, I always pay close attention to things like professional development, you know, team building, things of that nature, because making sure that the entire staff is mission and vision aligned organizationally, no matter what field you're in, it is essential because things can fly off the rails so easily and things like that breed resentment. Like it just happens. And
that's very
I mean, I
true.
don't know, people may think it's silly that, I left the association almost 10 years ago and I still think about that job constantly, but because it's like it was a job that you had to give basically everything to. That was the expectation. But at the same time, there was a whole other office that wasn't the expectation for,
Yeah, that
you
was
know?
painful. I think
And
that's a super good way of putting it. And I always felt like we were super accountable for stuff other people were not accountable for. And if
yeah,
the issue was if something went wrong, and it could have been with Rochester, Buffalo, New York City, whoever was working in those cities, that all still fell back on us.
yeah,
And after a while, it beats you down to you're like, is this even normal? Because if you don't know the mission statement, how how does that affect your work?
yeah. Well, it was rapid growth without like a cohesive vision for how we were going to integrate everybody there. I mean, you remember, of course, like there was the one day that person showed up at the office and she was like, "Oh, it's my first day."
I was just so I'm writing that book on org culture. And by the way, I have to send you some chapters because it's going to need heavy editing. But I just asked Andrea about that. What is your memory of that?
It
I'm
was
writing it down
insane.
though because it's going in my book
It
chapter
was
about it.
completely insane. And I will just say as an aside, I don't know if this really answers your question that you had asked. I'm sorry, I don't remember what the question really was. But I think, when I had started at the association, I was only 19 at the time. And like, I needed a job. And then it quickly turned into like the formative years that shaped what I do now. But um, obviously, I wouldn't do this work today if I didn't like believe in the schools. I didn't really like working with the schools. But those 6.5 years that I did at the association, it gave me a greater appreciation for like operations work and organizational structure work that really helped me in my next two jobs. Because when I went to like the Energy Association after that, we did two conferences every year. And like the skills I learned there for like just org structure stuff and just organizational like operations things really helped understand how to do things with that. And then at the state, the levels of bureaucracy there, which I mean, I think schools understand all too well, but also I feel like I was better equipped for understanding what goes on there.
Do you remember us planning conferences and getting ready and doing all the
We only did, I don't know how many we did when I was there. I only went to one because I was still like in
in
college.
college, right?
But I remember going to one in New York City. And I remember it might have been my first year there, the conference like planning group we had worked with
Hmm.
gave the wrong phone number and it went to a sex hotline.
And the first person to call it was a reverend.
Yeah, so that was bad.
That was a super bad day all around. I'm not even gonna lie. Yeah, I think so. Starting off with when you left, success schools weren't open. When you came back, they weren't open.
Yeah,
I thought when you put that in your bio, we all cracked up because it's all very true. The employee, Susan, who showed up saying she had the job, but also
yes,
didn't want to know what our mission statement was or like she simply didn't care. And I think when you work in an environment where you have one group of people who are so focused and just doing the work, and then you have other people around you not doing the same thing, it also breeds resentment in a way
yeah,
that's not fixable, not even over time. Like,
right. I think a lot of people were hired who weren't actually focused on like advancing the mission, or I guess the organization grew rapidly and it seemed as though many hires were just made, and those hires approach things as if we were brought in because, you're
they
the
were going to
old
save us,
tools.
right?
Right.
They were going to
Yeah.
save us, which is
Yeah.
how it was put. It's like, okay. So, how, I don't know how long Bill was there. Were you there when Kyle became boss?
Yeah. 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 Because I
You
was there
weren't
from
there when
2010 through
Janine became
2016.
boss, right?
No, no, no.
Okay. All right. So, we've watched the movement grow. We have We've seen some really good things. We've seen some really bad things. If you could go in and change anything in the movement immediately, what would it be?
Well, I know what I want to say, but
Say it. We can cut it if you don't want it out there.
well, the one thing I will say is what I find encouraging right now is that the new charter association in Connecticut that just popped up and the new charter association in New York that they're hiring a leader for. Um, I'm honestly not as tapped in on the advocacy side of things these days. I really just work with the schools I work with. I'm very happy to write renewals or new applications in New York and beyond and get to know schools and school leaders. And that is very fulfilling work. But it is very odd when you see New York, Connecticut schools in the news these days and then you just don't really hear anything from like a strong association. Excuse me, like the center still is out there sometimes.
Yeah, I don't know
Like,
what I honestly don't know what their role is anymore.
but like you'll still see like James pop up here and there sometimes.
I mean,
And
the question is, does that make them relevant in the movement? I mean, they're relevant because, like me, they're dinosaurs in the movement. Somebody like James. Uh,
but what is like relevant in the movement and what is, I don't
well,
know,
I think
in the
what
movement.
our organization sees as relevant is having the hard conversations about the authorizers and needing authorizer accountability. Um, did I tell you
Yeah,
about Andrea and the pulled data?
no,
Andrea
what's that?
decided to do this massive comparison. Uh, and she gave a percentage to Wendy. I'll tell you more about it when we end this, but let's just say it calls into question the authorizing, either authorizer knowing what quality looks like in a program. Like it's disgusting. So,
Well, it's just very odd that like schools that seemed to be failing and I I don't know what the proper metric should be. Like, I know people will get all wee-weed up about standardized testing and this and that, but it's been, again, I was 19 when I first started in this. I'm gonna be 35 this summer. And you can't look at either traditional district schools or charter schools and say that everything is still just working and a-okay. And there are schools that have been open since I was a teenager that are still open now, and their scores really don't look that much different from when I
right.
was like a teen or in my early 20s. Why are they open? What is the purpose? Like, just what is the purpose? What are you actually accomplishing?
I would tell you that has weighed heavily on us. And this goes to your advocacy point, like what is right the movement right now. If we really wanted to advocate, we'd advocate to shut down perpetually failing charter schools and get legislation passed that those charter schools can be open anywhere in the state. It would force the authorizers to shut down those failing schools. The issue is all the charters will go to the highest performing networks and not independent schools. And that is a problem in itself
Yeah,
as
and like
well.
that's the other thing is like how there has to be a way to stop networks from expanding.
Why? We have Success, I think, has four more pending. So even if a zombie charter school becomes available, they're getting it. So if I'm somebody who has an independent school and wants to replicate a one-off, what's the likelihood of me getting that when there's, I think, four or three pending for Success and two for Zeta? I can't remember off the top of my head, but it doesn't make a difference because if there's a zombie, SUNY's going to meet and automatically give them those charters. So
Yeah, that's just that's unhinged.
it's totally unhinged. We were making huge mistakes in the movement and nobody wants to say it. Not even schools, because schools, and we say that it's retribution, but I would tell you that schools would tell you that there are things they wanted to say to the authorizer and they can't because they're afraid the authorizer will take it out on them.
I mean,
And they
it
will.
was like all the way back in like 2024 or something when you looked at data. It was like for the coming 24-25 school year or something, Success had 10% of all New York State charter schools in the state. And it was like 12% of all the charters in the city.
Yep.
That was almost 2 years ago, that data
Yep.
is from. Like
And
that's,
listen, for the kids who stay, great program, right? For the kids who stay, the issue is there's no transparency on their attrition rate because they're looked at as a whole, like the education corporation, and less so now. Do you remember we did that whole thing and we could figure out what percentage of kids matriculated through their school? And there was
yeah,
only like, I think they started with 75, but 18 graduated of that 75 who moved forward. And
yeah.
people were outraged. And now the data isn't presented that way, so none of us can tell. So the data is presented by authorizers in a way that makes their case, but not necessarily transparent. And
And
that's
I mean, I don't
problem.
want to like just make it a big beat up on success thing, but
No, not at all.
it's been the same thing the whole time I've worked here. Like they've always been singled out because they're such a high performer. I know. But there was that SUNY meeting forever ago when they got more charters, and now they're like on the wait list for charters. And Eva Moskowitz had said that they would be like the something like the third largest district in New York State or something, which again is just crazy to even think about. And it just feels very odd to have seen so many news stories over the years about, kids being sent to the emergency room or like all these other things, like kids being forcibly removed from their buildings or other things that have made the actual news, not, you know,
Right, that we don't
blogs
know
or
about.
Reddit comments.
Right.
And people who defend success, if there was a school that Mayor Mamdani liked that had news stories written about them, they would not be like, look, grades. They would be like, close that school down. They're terrible. Like if the shoe were on the other foot, they wouldn't just be like, look at what the school's doing for the kids there. So it just feels very disingenuous, is
The
all. I
We ran the highest performing schools. We wanted to know the highest performing CMOs in New York State. I'm spooling, I don't know why. And classical beats success. Classical is 100% of their kids. So not to beat up on success, but they are the one that gets special favors from the authorizer. But then it begs the question, because they're such high performers, and we would agree with this, should there be less auditing of them? Should it be automatic renewal? Like there's a way to keep them out of the news because Icon's a high performer, Excellence Community is a high performer, Zeta, Success, Classical, and then there was one more. And then you're seeing long-term CMOs, AF, shut down a school, Uncommon is one of the lowest performers, Prospect. These are all, these were all like the shining stars that don't fall in the top five in CMOs in New York State. And so, can we, with a straight face, say building them bigger means success? Or are we going with the mentality they're too big to fail? And I think right now we're proving a bunch of CMOs shut down. Do you remember New Vision's shut down?
Yeah, they had like four schools or something, didn't
They
they?
had, yes, they had some under SUNY and then some under the Regents. Like, we're not paying attention to why CMOs are closing in New York State. And I do actually think that's a mistake.